Hey guys, it's Sam, and welcome to Caps Lock, a podcast designed to help you live bigger, better, louder, and longer. Before we get started, I just want to thank you guys for listening and for giving this a chance and for coming here in pursuit of your best self. This is a space where we are going to grow together, and my hope is that it helps you go forward confidently, unapologetically, and with purpose. It's time to live your life in Caps Lock. If that mission feels aligned for you, hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and let's dive in. As you guys know, if you're caught up on Caps Lock, I recently trained myself to be a morning person. It took less than a week for it to become a little bit less painful, which is a miracle because I am someone who regularly in my life stayed up past midnight every night. So less than a week for it to become a little less painful. And I would say about 2 weeks to really make it a habit where like those first few minutes suck, but then you're up and it's just something that you do in your life. So, like I said, those first few minutes are pretty rough, but I'm really enjoying the extra time I've been getting in the morning. It's giving me the space to work out, to be productive. In the Morning Person episode, I mentioned that there's really only been one drawback to the whole experience, which is my late afternoon crash. I feel like almost every day now, I've been getting so sleepy between like 3 and 5 p.m. And I'm sure it doesn't help that I basically work a desk and laptop job. So, like, you're sitting at that point in the day for several hours in a row, just staring at your screen. But after giving the whole morning person thing a go for another week, I think actually that the crash is symptomatic of a larger problem that I'm experiencing. Now, I say this a lot during the making of this show, but I want you to remember it. And that's why I say it all the time. A symptom is almost never the actual problem. Like when you have a headache, it didn't just like magically come out of nowhere and you need to eliminate the headache and then you're like good to go. If you have a headache, it's more likely than not your body is trying to tell you that something is wrong. But your body like can't say that in so many words, so it kind of sends the headache as a message to tell you that you're tired or dehydrated or hungry, and that is the underlying root problem that you need to fix, and then the headache goes away. Anyway, I think my afternoon crash is a symptom of my caffeine intake. And I had this moment sort of enlightenment about it as the result of a really terrible day last week. So we're going to do a little mini story time about it. I'm going to be really honest here. I love making this show. I really feel like I'm living out my dream and my purpose. And every time I get a DM from one of you guys saying that it's helping you or like something I said changed your outlook or changed your life, even I've heard, or every time we hit a PR on episode downloads, which that's a little inside baseball, but basically a download is a listen. So every time one of you listens, I get a download. Anyway, every time something like that happens, I feel like my purpose is being fulfilled. But the thing about making your passion your job, at least when we're talking about entrepreneurs, is that you're taking something that's so pure and so intensely personal and meaningful to you, and you're doing two things with it. The first is you're inviting a lot of feedback, and the second is that you're betting money on it. And those two things are pretty scary to do. So I don't talk about this a lot, but I have made some sacrifices to make this my career because I truly believe that if you have the means, you should give your dreams 1,000,000% before you decide whether they're going to work out or not. You can't really like half-ass something and be like, well, I gave it the old college try and then give up. I just feel like if I did that, I would regret it forever. And then I would never know if it would have worked out if I had just like given it a little bit extra oomph, you know? So, staying true to my deeply earnest self, I am trying. I'm trying hard as fuck to make something amazing for you guys that can also be my career. And as such, I have invested so much time and energy and love and money into the making of this show. I'm only doing work that I feel provides value to you. I'm only working directly with brands that I feel like they align with your and my interests and lifestyles. And I'm not just accepting every offer of every dollar that comes my way because this work means so much more to me than that, which means that as of today, I haven't seen a dime of income from it. Now, despite the fact that my business is still in the early stages where it's not profitable yet, it consumes every waking moment of my brain space. And It's hard work to make something that I'm proud of and actually provides value to you. And it's kind of expensive to make a podcast. All of that is to say, entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart, no matter what form you're doing it in. And the stress of going another month without income from my full time job while simultaneously paying a new mortgage and renovating and decorating my apartment and paying what it costs to actually run the business out of pocket. It's just like that kind of stuff when you're an entrepreneur, it weighs on you a little bit. Anyway, I swear this story is going to wind up at caffeine. Anyway, this stress has been sitting in the back of my mind, probably taking a little bit more of a toll on me than I had kind of realized. And the other day, I woke up in the dark at 6:15 a.m. Hey, morning person. And I brushed my teeth, I chugged some water, and I grabbed the only thing on God's green earth that could get me up out of bed and onto a treadmill in the pitch black dark of the morning. And it's an energy drink. So I go to Rumble. I take my insanely hard treadmill class. It's so much fun. We're singing and dancing in between reps. Life is good. I get home, hop in the shower, throw on some sweats, and I sit down at my desk with my to-do list, which, if you know me, you know that it is several pages long. We're talking like 5 subject, spiral bound notebook, and every single line is filled twice. And I'm staring at it, and the overwhelm starts to rise in my chest. And I'm looking at this to-do list, but I'm not really like seeing it. And instead, my brain starts absolutely spiraling. I'm thinking about how in fuck this renovation got so expensive, how many unread emails my phone just told me I have, how like long this to-do list is, how I accidentally double booked myself for Friday night and now I'm going to need to like call someone and disappoint them, how I haven't booked a flight for this trip I'm going on and the prices just keep going up. I'm thinking about every single one of these things and more in a sort of like half baked fever dream kind of way, where I literally can't see what's in front of my eyes. And the inside of my brain looks and feels like a tornado. And my heart is racing and I'm breathing all shallow. And I can't even finish a thought before the next one comes barreling in like a bull in a china shop. And while all of that is happening, my phone is pinging me with notification after notification. And all around me, because don't forget, I'm in my home, like at my desk in my room. So all around me is just this like warm, peaceful silence. But inside, I'm having a meltdown. And I catch myself in the reflection of my laptop screen and I just burst into tears. I'm talking like ugly cry. And like, this is so embarrassing, but it's like, when you're crying by yourself and it's like loud, like you're making sound. I don't know why that's so embarrassing, but it is. And that's the kind of cry I was having. And then for the rest of my day, I was like the least productive I had ever been in my entire life. Everything felt like a huge, daunting task. I just kept finding distractions and excuses not to do my work. Every time my phone lit up, I would like get sucked into a social media spiral. And then I would snap back like 10, 15 minutes later and be like, how did that happen to me? So I was a mess. And all the while, my emotions were on level 1 million. Like my mom sent me this video of a tortoise eating all different like snacks on Instagram. I literally burst into tears again and I'm crying for like another 15 minutes. And then I cried again after lunch because I was like eating my feelings and made myself nauseous. Anyway, I was just so sensitive. And, my life is pretty great. Like, yeah, I'm stressed out about starting a new business, but this is my third one and I have a pretty good track record, honestly. Like, I've never really doubted whether I could do this. It's just a lot of pressure. And I have an amazing relationship, an amazing family, amazing friends, an amazing home. And despite the stress of running a new business, I'm really like building my dream life through this podcast. And that's incredibly rewarding. So the stress is really like 10, maybe 20% of my day to day life. But my meltdown felt like so disproportionate to this stressor itself. And I couldn't for the life of me snap myself out of it. Now, it took me like 2 full days before I was back in a stable headspace. And after stepping back from the situation to analyze it fully, I realized that I'd had like kind of a similar sort of panicky feeling not all that long ago. So I'm a journaler now. So I flipped back in my journal to see if there was anything that stood out to me about that day. And guys, I had literally written in the journal that I thought the caffeine was making me insane because I had felt super emotional and sensitive that day, but I wasn't being productive at all. And I just felt like I was going crazy. So if you're not seeing the pattern here yet, horrible day number one, I'm all hopped up on caffeine. Horrible day number two, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm all hopped up on caffeine. So, I just want to preface the sciencey part of this episode by sharing my current personal caffeine habits for full transparency. Because honestly, I just want you guys to know like, I'm not just like a narc that does everything right and I'm here to shame you for for being bad. I'm a narc who does a lot of dumb stuff myself, but I'm trying to change my habits and be like a healthier, better narc. So, that's what we're here to do today. Now, my longest and realest followers know that I literally hate coffee, and that's so off brand for me, I know, but I just cannot stand the taste of it. Love the smell, so please, by all means, drink coffee around me, but I'll just like never really be a coffee drinker. And I think it's partly because I grew up in a household where no one in my family drank coffee. But I love caffeine. So on my days off from the gym, I actually have no caffeine. Like I wake up and I drink water and I like get to work and I'm fine. On low impact days when I'm doing like an incline walk or maybe like a Pilates class, I do a green tea, which usually has like 75 milligrams of caffeine. I also do that on days when I lift weights because I feel like if I'm not like jumping around or moving fast, like I don't need anything really intense. But on my cardio days, which happens like 1 to 2 times every week, I rely heavily on pre workout and energy drinks to get me up out of bed and in the door of that gym. I've heard anecdotally, of course, that these things are terrible for you, but honestly, I've just found that green tea doesn't give me like the kick in the ass I need to sprint at 9 miles an hour on a treadmill before the sun rises. And I don't drink coffee. So I was like never really motivated to reform that habit until last week when I had that awful day. So, worst day ever led me down a major research rabbit hole. And today we are here to talk about it because every time I learn something that makes my life better, I feel that it is my duty to report back to you guys. And as a mini spoiler and disclaimer, I am actually very excited to report that what I found out about caffeine in my research is actually largely positive. And there are just some like weird circumstances and side effects that can lead to worst days ever. But we're going to talk about all of it, good and bad. So let's do it. I want to start with the basics. What is caffeine? Caffeine is a naturally occurring stimulant that can be found in over 60 plants, but it is most commonly found in coffee, tea, and cacao plants. So you've most likely encountered it in its natural state in coffee, tea, chocolate, or also this thing called a cola nut, that's what's used to flavor soft drinks, which if you say it out loud, you hear it. Now, there's also such thing as synthetic man-made caffeine, which is added to some food and drinks, like a lot of energy drinks, some focus mints, some focused chewing gums, that kind of thing. The first thing I want to talk about in today's episode is that there is a difference between naturally sourced caffeine and synthetic man-made caffeine, despite the final products being chemically identical. And I want to shout out a company here called Proper Wild, which makes energy drinks and gummies because they actually have a fascinating and very well researched blog post on this topic, which I'll now be summarizing. And it also like really made me want to try their products because I feel like I can trust them because all of this information was like so transparent and so helpful. So thank you, Proper Wild, for this information. So, naturally sourced caffeine is extracted from plants in a variety of ways. And as we know, some of those ways are very simple. For example, to extract the caffeine from tea leaves, you just soak it in hot water, and there you have caffeine. Some labs that mass produce naturally caffeinated products use a chemical solvent called supercritical carbon dioxide. And I know that sounds like weird and scary and chemically, but basically it's just carbon dioxide that's artificially held in a liquid state. Now, I do want to have a little nerd break right here because supercritical carbon dioxide already exists naturally in this liquid state under the Earth's seabed. It also exists naturally in this liquid state on Venus, like the planet. And scientists believe that it also most likely exists naturally on exoplanets, which are planets that exist outside of our own solar system. Like NASA thinks there are billions of these exoplanets, and some of them, in theory, could support extraterrestrial life forms, which is crazy. And we've already confirmed the existence of 5,800 exoplanets out of these billions. I just thought that was cool. So I'm going to stop nerding out on that. We're going to go back to caffeine. Anyway, in case you fell asleep during science class 15 years ago, a solvent, which, like, that's what I was saying is supercritical carbon dioxide is used as a solvent here. It's really just a liquid in which other substances dissolve to form a solution. And supercritical carbon dioxide is a particularly good solvent for extracting the caffeine from plant matter. It's also widely considered a pretty like green and eco-friendly practice, and it's not inherently toxic to humans in small doses. Plus, it gets cleaned off of any treated materials that are meant for human consumption. So, overall, this is a pretty great method for extracting naturally sourced caffeine. However, because of capitalism, and I always say this, we're not ready to have the capitalism conversation on this podcast someday, but not today. But because of capitalism, there is just like insane global demand for caffeinated products. Um, Roughly 80% of the world's population consumes a caffeinated product every single day. And that number exceeds 90% for adults in North America. More than 90% of us every single day are ingesting caffeine. And the natural process for extracting it from plants honestly just cannot keep up. And that's where synthetic man made caffeine comes in. And also, as I'm sure you're already guessing, synthetic caffeine is way cheaper to make and buy. So, like, a lot of the big companies just love that. Synthetic caffeine starts out with ammonia, which, as we know, is not very good for you to swallow. Via chemical agents, the ammonia is then turned into urea, which sounds like the word urine because it is, in fact, found in human urine. Ew. And then it goes through a couple more chemical conversions before becoming caffeine. Now, if that was not enough to turn you the fuck off of synthetic caffeine, because that's literally so gross, there's something really weird and crazy about it because before it becomes this like powder substance that's then sold out to the companies who use synthetic caffeine in their products, it glows blue. Now, if you think you heard me wrong or misunderstood what I'm saying, you didn't. It is phosphorescent, as in like glow in the dark. And I don't know about you guys, but my mommy and daddy taught me not to eat glow sticks as a kid. And what's worse, somehow, like if this can literally get worse, we went from ammonia to human urine to glows in the dark blue, but it gets worse because in order to make it stop glowing blue, so that the companies are comfortable buying it to put in their products instead of being like, "Are you fucking kidding me? What is this?" The glow in the dark synthetic caffeine is washed with sodium nitrite, acetic acid, sodium carbonate, and chloroform. Like, the stuff that they like knock girls out with in serial killer movies so they can serial kill them. Yeah. So that's cool. And then after all of that, that's when it's sold to these companies who put it into your drinks, which you drink. So that's gross. Oh, actually, and another thing. Oh my God, this is so bad, guys. Another thing, synthetic caffeine is like way, way stronger than natural caffeine. According to the FDA, one single teaspoon of it is the equivalent to drinking 28 cups of coffee. And ingesting too much of it can cause serious health effects, as I'm sure you already assume, including dangerously rapid or erratic heartbeat, vomiting, diarrhea, stupor and disorientation, seizures, and the big one, death. So, I'm like tired of saying all the bad stuff. One thing that we can do to consume caffeine responsibly is to do a little bit of research on the mini supercomputer that you're already holding in your very own little hand right now and see if the kinds of products we are consuming are made with natural or synthetic caffeine and only drink the ones with natural caffeine. That was such a good TED Talk. Thank you for buying tickets to that show. So now let's move forward under the assumption that you are consuming naturally derived caffeine because you just learned how many reasons there are to do that and you're smart cookies. So after you consume caffeine, it takes between 30 and 60 minutes to absorb into your bloodstream and reach its peak efficacy. And then it does a handful of things, but the biggest one is that it blocks your adenosine receptors. If you listened to the Morning Person episode last week, you know that our brains produce adenosine throughout the day. And adenosine is a neurotransmitter that basically just makes us sleepy. It's like a big part of why we get tired at the end of the day and at night. And through your adenosine receptors, caffeine affects your short term brain functions like sleep, cognition, and memory. So, this whole first section is going to be about caffeine in the brain. Then I'm going to move into caffeine in the body. And then we're going to talk about like the biggest ways that we consume caffeine and like pros and cons to all of them, give you a little bit of sciencey information about that. So, let's go through those things in order: sleep, cognition, and memory. We'll start with sleep. Now, this is obviously like a spot where it's one of the negatives when it comes to caffeine consumption. And since you already know that, I'm kind of going to like blow through it. But basically, caffeine consumption between 100 milligrams and the FDA approved maximum of 400 milligrams per day pretty significantly impacts our sleep onset latency. And that just means that it takes longer for you to get to sleep once you like go to bed. Like it's harder for you to fall asleep. It also increases your likelihood of waking up in the night. And as the caffeine intake goes up, you sleep less and less efficiently, meaning your quality of sleep also sucks. And the more you consume, the worse these effects are. So if you exceed 300 milligrams in a day and you kind of get up toward that 400, that's when you start to really experience significant reduction in your deep sleep and your REM sleep, which some of you may know, those are essential types of sleep to feeling rested, to sealing your memories, making long-term memories. It's also essential for your muscle and tissue repair, cell regeneration, and your higher cognitive function. So, in terms of sleeping well and drinking caffeine, because we want to have our cake and eat it too, let's just make sure we're ideally not exceeding 300 milligrams of caffeine in a day, definitely not exceeding 400. And most doctors recommend having all your caffeine kind of like before noon if possible, but like at most finishing your intake at least 8 hours before you want to go to sleep. Okay, moving on. Now we're going to talk about caffeine's impact on your cognition. And this is more fun because it's largely positive. So, from all this research, and don't forget, I link all my references, every study I mention, every fact I mention, there's a reference corresponding to it in the show notes. So, definitely check it out. I tell people, like, I think you should read like the entirety of these links. I think they're so interesting. I only pull things out from like really credible sources, and I like love nerding out on this stuff. So, but anyway, everything's in the show notes. So, one thing I learned during all this research is that caffeine in doses up to 300 milligrams has been proven time and time again to positively impact your low order cognitive functions. So, like alertness, attention, vigilance, reaction time. High order executive function, like long term memory recall, is a little bit less widely studied, and therefore there's a little bit less evidence to support that caffeine helps there. But in terms of like your lower order cognitive function like that, caffeine is great for that. Now, interestingly, there is a scientific law called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which essentially says that low levels of physiological arousal, so in this case, like what caffeine does to you by like arousing your system, low levels of physiological arousal produce poor performance quality, whereas higher levels of physiological arousal produce good performance quality. But it's a bell curve, which means that extremely high levels of arousal actually begin to kind of lower your performance quality again. So essentially, like with most things, there's a middle ground: super low and super high arousal levels of caffeine intake in this case. Those are going to mess you up, while the medium levels of arousal tend to lead to improved cognition. This makes sense to me because I was like so jumbled and confused, sort of like on my worst day ever. I felt like I just like had all this brain fog. And I also had extremely low output on that day, in addition to my heightened emotional state and anxiety, both of which we'll touch on shortly. So all of this is tracking for me so far. But before we get into like the emotions and the anxiety and all that, let's move on quickly to memory. Researchers at Johns Hopkins discovered that caffeine does have a positive impact on your short term memory. So they did an experiment where they had people try to memorize images. And then after they tried to memorize these images, they ingested either caffeine or a placebo. Then the next day, they showed everybody mostly the same images, but then they mixed in other images that were kind of similar, but like slightly off from the ones from the previous day. The subjects who ingested caffeine could better identify which images were slightly off, even though they were pretty similar. And the reason that's significant and important is because that shows a caffeine-induced improvement in something called pattern separation, which is a deeper level of memory retention and cognitive functioning than noticing if there were images that were like completely different. So, for example, like if you're shown a picture of a guy with a red shirt and then you're shown a picture of a guy with a blue shirt, you're like, okay, that's not the same. But maybe he had like a different eye color. Those people were identifying those kinds of differences. And that calls back to kind of a deeper level of cognitive recall. So I thought that was interesting. Of course, the flip side of this coin is that you actually need deep and REM sleep to make and seal long term memories. So if you're overdoing the caffeine, we get to a place where you're having a reduction in those types of sleep, and then your long term memory is actually impaired. So again, here, moderation and mindful consumption are key. And then, of course, this whole conversation about caffeine in the brain would be completely moot if we didn't mention the impact on your mental health, specifically relating to anxiety and mood and depression. Now, I think this is pretty obvious to all of you guys. Caffeine worsens anxiety, although it does seem kind of from the research that low doses of caffeine might actually improve it a little bit, and only the higher doses actually make it worse. So, the adenosine receptors that make you sleepy are also in control of relaxation, which kind of seems obvious because, like, when you're blocking them, they make you alert and focused, which is like kind of the opposite of relaxation. But anyway, blocking these receptors makes it hard for you to be chill. And basically, it results in nervous system stimulation that can activate a fight or flight response in your brain and body. Consuming caffeine in higher doses also releases a lot of adrenaline in your body, and that increases your heart rate and your breathing rate. And that mimics panic symptoms. So it leads your brain to believe that your body is in danger. In terms of your mood, I do think it's interesting to note here that these same adenosine receptors we're talking about that react with caffeine to keep you alert and awake, they're also responsible for your ground emotional processing and mood disorders. So it can lead to heightened emotional experiences and reactions when you have too much caffeine. I think a lot of the problem here is that these adenosine receptors, like the blockage of them, is really a double-edged sword. Like that's the good thing, right? It's keeping you alert and awake and focused. But it's also the bad thing because the overlap in responsibilities is that it also messes with your emotions and your ability to like relax and fall asleep at night. Perhaps unexpectedly, at least to me, it seems that caffeine is effective in reducing depression. And that feels like it goes against everything I just said about anxiety, which, as we know, anxiety and depression are oftentimes lumped together. But honestly, there's a decent amount of research to support that caffeine is good at reducing the impact of depression. So, like, slay. A December 2022 study said that despite a lack of conclusive evidence prior to their investigation, they were able to find that caffeine does, in fact, have an impact on depression. In the study, small to moderate doses of caffeine had a negative association with depression. And basically, what that means is that people who had low to moderate amounts of caffeine were less depressed, and people who had just like a tiny bit or a whole lot of caffeine were more depressed. So, like, there's that bell curve again. That seems to be a strong recurrent pattern in all of these findings. Now, another study found that test subjects who had 2 to 3 cups of coffee per day had a lower risk of mental and mood disorders, particularly as it relates to depression, and then also in some cases, anxiety. Interestingly, caffeine can also modify long term brain dysfunctions and diseases. So, one study explored in particular Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And I'm going to summarize this study now, but this is one of those ones where I strongly recommend reading the whole thing, which is linked in the show notes, because I just thought this one was so fascinating. And there's a lot of context that I think helps you understand it better. But anyway, basics on Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is marked by the loss of brain cells, the buildup of a harmful plaque called amyloid beta, and also tangles of a protein called tau. Now, interestingly, when caffeine blocks a certain adenosine receptor, it hinders the formation of that harmful plaque in the brain, and it actually prevents the damage that the plaque would normally cause to your neurons. So, this study basically found that research participants with regular consumption of 3 to 5 cups of coffee per day had a 62 to 70% lower chance of developing Alzheimer's and dementia. That's a crazy number, you guys. 62 to 70% lower chance of developing Alzheimer's. That's kind of like groundbreaking research. And at first, they actually weren't sure that it was the caffeine doing that. And they thought like maybe it was some of the other compounds in coffee that could be at least partly responsible for the finding. So they did the same experiment, but they used decaf coffee and they did not find that it had the same cognitive benefits. So they were actually able to isolate caffeine as the most influential variable in those results. That was just, I thought that was so crazy. Now, in terms of Parkinson's, more very interesting findings here. In a study of 8,000 men, those who drank at least 28 ounces of caffeine every day were found 5 times less likely to develop Parkinson's than those who drank little to no caffeine. And if you think the study of 8,000 men isn't a wide enough testing group, same here. Another study of 319,000 men and women had similar findings. Those who drank more caffeine had a significantly lower risk of developing Parkinson's. Now, it is worth noting that it did not help reduce symptoms in people who were already diagnosed. So it seems to be more of a protective agent in terms of like initial onset than helping kind of improve the state of your disease. Now, obviously, there are physical manifestations of some of the caffeine induced cognitive effects I mentioned earlier. For example, like when you're anxious, your heart rate is also up. But I put things like that in the like brain cognitive category because the primary impact of caffeine in those circumstances affected the brain. And if there were associated physical effects, they were just like less significant or just a byproduct as opposed to the main event. But as we know, caffeine can also have potent physical effects where the physical manifestation is the primary impact. And those are mostly, like for the most part, they're immediate and they wear off in the same day. Those ones are, like we said, making you feel awake and alert. It's also a diuretic, which means it makes you have to pee, which helps your body kind of get rid of like extra salt and water. It also increases the release of acid in your stomach, which can give you an upset stomach or heartburn. And in like serious scenarios, it can lead to stomach ulcers. Caffeine elevates your heart rate, also your breathing rate. It can make you feel dehydrated. And then if you have like way too much caffeine, those symptoms can escalate into things like elevated body temperature, headaches, dizziness, irregular heartbeat, trembling hands, elevated blood pressure. But again, those symptoms really are just temporary and they only really last as long as the caffeine is in your system. It's also very rare, by the way, to overdose on caffeine. And most of those overdose cases are tied back to the synthetic caffeine, and they're most often consumed in the form of caffeine pills. Now, one time when a lot of us are drinking caffeine outside of a work environment is when we're hitting the gym. And the reasons caffeine helps us with physical performance are as follows. One, it releases epinephrine, more commonly known as adrenaline, which can improve your physical performance and kind of increase your output. Two, it helps break down fat. I thought that was so interesting. Like, I think a lot of people associate like drinking caffeine and weight loss because it is an appetite repressant, but it actually also actively helps your body break down fat cells. Three, it can help increase the production of endorphins, which is kind of when you get that like runner's high or whatever, like that high from working out. And four, it increases thermogenesis, which basically just means it helps us burn calories more effectively. Now, like I said, there's mostly like anecdotal evidence to suggest that caffeine can help you lose weight, and a lot of it is related to appetite suppression. And most of the formal research on that topic is like inconclusive. When it comes to long term physical health, there's not, again, like a ton of conclusive research on caffeine in isolation. A lot of the research is actually on coffee, which many of you will be thrilled to hear is great for you in moderate amounts. So, the only like recurring themes I could find in caffeine's impact on your long term physical health were that it might negatively impact your bone density over time. So, like it might cause osteoporosis, it can increase baseline levels of acidity in your gut, which, like I said earlier, might lead to stomach ulcers. And over time, like with your heart rate kind of elevated on a regular basis like that, it winds up just making your heart work harder over time to like pump your blood out, which can lead to heart issues getting worse over time. But that's really only like with truly excessive use of caffeine. There is research out there on other long term health conditions and circumstances linked to caffeine, but again, the findings are inconclusive. Sometimes they're even conflicting, things like the impacts of caffeine on longevity, inflammation, et cetera. So I kind of feel neutral about that because honestly, we really just like don't know about positive or negative long term effects. Now, let's talk briefly about the most popular types of caffeine because I know most of you just want to know if you can keep drinking your morning coffee. The truth is, coffee is net good for you, particularly if you drink it filtered and black. Don't be adding that sugar water, which some of you know as oat milk or almond milk. That has no nutritional value at all. If you add anything, let it be a cow milk or a low fat milk. I'm sorry to my lactose intolerant girlies. That is just simply the best way to do it. And of course, when you go to a place like a coffee shop and get all the flavors and the syrups and the sugar, that's bad. But if you're drinking black filtered coffee, you're in a pretty good spot. Benefits of black coffee include lots of antioxidants that they promote insulin sensitivity and therefore helps reduce inflammation. It can improve your metabolism. It decreases your risk of diabetes, liver disease, heart disease, and stroke. Supports your gut health, could help you manage your weight, and could even, in theory, there needs to be more research to be conclusive on this, but in theory, it could contribute to increased longevity, even if it's just as a byproduct because you're at lower risk of getting things like diabetes. Now, a lot of you are also drinking tea or drinking tea instead of coffee. Good news, that's also net good for you, minus all the gross sweeteners. Like coffee, it has lots and lots of powerful, naturally occurring antioxidants. It can reduce your blood sugar. It also has less caffeine typically than coffee, which means you are at lower risk of overdoing it. This study was so interesting, and I just wanted to raise it because I thought it was cool, and where's a better place to do it? In a study of more than 40,000 people who drink green tea on a regular basis, women who drank tea had a 30% lower risk of developing heart disease, a 60% lower risk of dying by stroke, and a 65% decrease in high blood pressure. And then also, that same group had a 23% reduction in all-cause mortality. So definitely be drinking your tea. Love green tea, especially. I think that is a fan fave. Another super common way that we are ingesting our caffeine is through these energy drinks. Now, these are a little bit more dangerous because they are more likely to have synthetic caffeine. They're also likely to have the highest caffeine concentration, and they most often have a ton of sugar in them. Energy drinks are also the type of caffeine that's most often mixed with alcohol, which is terrible for your heart because of the stimulant depressant combo. And so there was an interesting study I read that said adults who mixed alcohol and energy drinks were 6 times as likely to experience heart palpitations than adults who just drink the alcohol by itself. And it became a problem to the point where the FDA started forcing companies to actually remove stimulants from their alcoholic beverages in 2010 because there were so many medical problems. They were seeing so many people in the ER as a result of this. And there were just so many related deaths. They were take the caffeine out. This is too dangerous. There are, of course, energy drinks that are made with naturally derived caffeine. And if you are responsible about how much of it you're drinking, good for you. That can be totally okay. Also worth noting, of course, that over time, if you continue to use particularly high doses of caffeine, you can start to build a tolerance to it, in which case you're going to need more and more and more to experience the upsides of it. So that's kind of where energy drinks become kind of a gray area, because if you're having a 200 milligram energy drink every single morning before your workout, you're going to need eventually 300 milligrams to feel good in the morning, and then 400. And that's where we start getting into really dangerous territory. So, energy drinks can be okay. Just keep an eye on them. Make sure you're trying to have ones that have natural caffeine in them instead of synthetic caffeine. Something you can look for if you're looking for a natural caffeine in an energy drink is guarana. That is a plant where they extract caffeine from it, and it's a pretty strong source of caffeine. So that is chill. Now, another similarly kind of gray area one is caffeine pills. Very similar to energy drinks in the sense that sometimes they use synthetic caffeine, a lot of times have a much higher concentration of caffeine. However, if you are doing low dosage naturally derived caffeine pills, these can actually be one of your best options because researchers have found that one of the best ways to experience the upside of caffeine is to like kind of dose it out in small hits throughout your day. So, like taking a caffeine pill that has like 50 to 75 milligrams of caffeine at a time is a really good way for you to kind of maintain the upsides of the caffeine and not experience that like major crash you get when you chug an energy drink before Rumble. And the last type of caffeine I just want to talk to you about is called yerba mate. This I don't know a ton about. Like some studies say that it's good for your cholesterol, good for inflammation, good for your heart health, but other research says it can be linked to an increased risk of cancer. So, jury's kind of out on that. I would love to see more research on it, and I would love to explore this specific topic further. So, if you are a yerba mate person and you have some information, especially someone who like works in the caffeine industry, I would love to talk to you. So if you're listening to this, come say hi in the DMs. So those are kind of like the most popular caffeine products that we're consuming. And a good rule of thumb, if you're ever not sure or you can't see the ingredients or the dosages and you like don't have a way to look this up, like that almost literally never happens. But if you're ever not sure, a good rule of thumb is if it comes from the earth, you're chilling. If it is not, if it is man-made, go light on it, go easy on it, or maybe like don't drink it at all. The last thing I want to talk to you about, this is like a pretty quick episode today because the truth is like the findings were pretty lit. But the last thing I want to mention is that caffeine can be habit forming. While it is not technically considered addictive, it can create physical and psychological dependence. So, if you're planning to change your habits surrounding caffeine intake, it is important to do so gradually so that you don't experience the downside of withdrawal symptoms, which can be fatigue, headaches, irritability, that kind of stuff. But it can get pretty bad if you're going from like 400 milligrams a day of caffeine to like raw dogging it on zero. So just be gradual about it if you're trying to make changes to your habits. And keep in mind that caffeine is not only habit forming, but also you can build a tolerance to it. So that's all I have for you today, guys. It was a quick episode, but very dense with information. If there's anything you think that I missed or you want me to double click on, please shoot me a message. Otherwise, I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope your caffeine habits are healthy or become healthy. And now you know that your morning coffee is an absolute blessing, and no one can take that away from you. And if they try to, send them to me. I'll take care of them. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for giving Caps Lock a chance. If you liked this episode, please stick around for more. We have some really interesting topics coming up, including procrastination, hormones 101, what to do when you feel stuck at work or in life, manifestation, cortisol, how to make friends as an adult, and so much more. Some of them will be solo episodes, and some will feature scientists, founders, experts, doctors, and other very cool, smart people. If there's a topic you want to hear about on Caps Lock, send me a message. And lastly, follow us on socials, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all the things at Life in Caps Lock. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Leave me a rating or review. Guys, I have cried thrice this week alone at how nice the reviews are. And it's really good for podcasters. It's a really good gauge of how we're doing. And I just really appreciate every single rating or review you guys are leaving. And make sure to tune in next Sunday at 8 a.m. for another episode of Caps Lock. Okay. Love you guys. Talk soon.